everyone. Welcome back to Heartbeat Narratives. My name is Molly, and I'm your host. And today I'm so excited to welcome my friend Emily Reno to the podcast. Emily, thank you for coming today.
Absolutely. So happy to be here.
Emily and we met through the Air Media New Voices Amplify cohort. We immediately hit it off. We had the Minnesota connection, a lot of aligned interests in terms of holistic well being. And I'm very eager for people to hear your story because I feel like everything you're doing, weaving in your interests for this greater good of serving the agricultural industry and beyond is fascinating. So, for our listeners, I wanted to share a little bit about you from your bio. So, here we go. Emily is a Kansas born, Mexico based strategist, podcaster, and entrepreneur, transforming how farmers think about land, money, and possibility. As the founder of Mezclada, she merges AI, behavioral psychology, and regenerative planning to help beginning farmers access land and capital faster, while building businesses that support their mental, emotional, and financial health. Emily hosts the Transcendent Farmer podcast and leads widely praised workshops like the 3-day Farm Funding Challenge. A true Scorpio, she brings depth, discernment, and radical honesty to conversations about agriculture, leadership, and self development. Her mission is simple: help farmers create lives and businesses that feel aligned, abundant, and sustainable. So, mahalo, Emily, for being here today. And I wanted to ask, where are you calling in from?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'm calling in today from a city called Leon in the state of Guanajuato in central Mexico. If folks are familiar with Mexico, in relation to Mexico City, I'm about a 4.5 hour bus ride northwest.
And I know that you've traveled a lot, you've lived in many different places, but how did you end up living in Mexico? Because I feel like there's a story behind all of this.
Yeah, isn't there always? It's interesting because you could have asked me at the beginning of 2025 where I thought I was going to end up, and it definitely wasn't here. I would say that the travel journey really started at the end of December 2023. I would say in a bigger way than it had previously because I had traveled internationally a fair amount throughout community college and my master's degree a little bit, but then also during my bachelor's degree. And honestly, it was just a way of trying to see the world with no funds to do it. So I would seek out scholarship opportunities any and everywhere I could to be able to travel because it wasn't something that my family had the financial resources to support me to do. But of course, I still had these huge interests in just getting to know the world. So I would apply for these things and get to see things. And actually, it was one of my first trips abroad was to Mexico, interestingly enough. And it was to install solar water heaters as part of this service program where the community college I was going to in Overland Park, Kansas, they had a great relationship with this suburb of Guadalajara. And they would bring nursing students from the nursing program down, but then they would also bring volunteers who wanted to learn how to help the residents locally build these really just scrappy systems, I think is the right way to describe it. So you could purchase any of the materials from a local hardware store and install them there. And the only things that we would bring were the pumps and then a small solar panel. And then we would do this workshop where we'd work with the community, build these solar water heaters. And then the goal was that for each family that received one that we installed, they were responsible for teaching 5 other families how to do it. And so it was a really cool program that extended in a big way. And ultimately, that trip was what changed my life and changed everything about what I felt happiness could look like. And that it wasn't determined by material goods, it was the quality of relationships that you had and being content with just enough. And that was something that trip taught me. And it forever shaped this concept that, okay, come December 2023, I had traveled a fair amount through these scholarships. I had traveled to Costa Rica in the winters working remotely for a few years at that point. And I had also transitioned my work to be 100% remote so that I could have more flexibility. And ultimately, I was setting myself up for applying for a digital nomad visa through the Costa Rican government to relocate there permanently. And that didn't end up happening even though that was part of the plan, ended up going to India to study yoga. I was there for about 5 weeks and then also attended a friend's wedding. And then I went to Australia to spend 3 months with my sister. She's almost a dual citizen there, but has been there for about 10 years. And she's my best friend. And so it was really important for me to prioritize spending time with her, especially when I was in a place where I had so much freedom in my work. And then I went back to Costa Rica thinking that was where I was going to be forever. And there was this peace. There's this feeling, that inner voice that we try to ignore, but always comes back. And it was saying, there's still something missing. And I couldn't figure out what that was because there were so many areas of life that I felt very satisfied. My rustic cabin in the hillside of this suburb of Grecia, which was the name of the town in the Central Valley, was blissful beyond belief. I would wake up to the sound of these birds in this valley and have the most impressive view of San Jose, which is the capital. And I would pinch myself every morning with that view that I woke up to. And what I was paying for rent versus what I was getting, like, no, we didn't have hot water. It was very rustic in many ways, but I was so happy. And I had co-working space in town. I had come up with this very informal arrangement where I would teach yoga classes to an older woman. And then in exchange, the family's like architecture business would give me space within their office. So they shared in their home. So I would be there for a couple of days a week. And they would, oh my gosh, it's just like so luxurious. They would give me breakfast after I taught yoga class to her mom. And then they would make me coffee and bring tea in the afternoon. And it was just like unreal. There were so many elements. And I was going to a local dance academy, continuing to practice Latin dance. And yet there was that inner voice that was like, something is still missing here. And around that time, I met someone who was working through a local contract, and he was Mexican. And it planted the seed, or like it was like the water on the seed that was already within me of, Emily, you need to meet your family, because if you don't now, when are you going to? And honestly, it was just meeting him that spurred this outreach to my dad to ask, okay, do we have any family members that are in Mexico that are still alive? Are they safe people to meet? And if so, would you mind helping facilitate a connection between myself and them so that I can meet them? And he said, yes, I have 2 sisters. They're awesome. They would love to get to meet you, and I will put you in touch with them. And so fast forward like 5 months, I celebrated my 30th birthday with 2 of my aunts who I was meeting for the first time in my life. Within about 24 hours, I knew this is what I was looking for. And so then fast forward another 6 months, I'm flying back to Mexico on a temporary resident visa that had been approved through the embassy in Minnesota that basically granted me 3 years to be here. And by the time I made it to the immigration office to file the rest of my paperwork, the staff members were like, you should just claim your Mexican nationality. It doesn't make sense for you to be here on a temporary resident visa. It's going to be a lot faster for you. If your dad is Mexican, just get dual citizenship. And honestly, at that point, I was so exhausted from all of the international travel that I was like, I'm just going to do it. I'm not going to overthink it. Even though I was considering going back to Costa Rica, going back to Australia to live with my sister, I just knew I needed to make a decision, stay planted, and trust that things are going to work out. And here I am.
Just following your inner voice. I'm so impressed with everything that you've been balancing over the past few years. Not just your own interests, but also like uncovering identity and family roots, language and dance and agriculture. I feel like, how do you do it all? There's quite a few directions we could go from this point, but to really get to the heart of it and this conversation, I wanted to ask you what brings you joy, what lights you up, and then we'll just go from there.
That sounds great. Yeah. And it is a journey. I think that it's part of my personality that naturally I'm drawn into 1,000 different directions at once. Anybody who knows me, especially from when I was a kid, it's one of the things that I think my parents have made fun of me the most for. They're like, Emily, focus. That is the saying that like always comes to me of just their, yeah, their perspective of my multimodal interests. And one of those is Latin dance. And this is a part of my life that I think a lot of people have never known about me. It's something that really developed, I would say the seed for that was planted back in high school. So a lot of people, at least from the stuff that maybe I've published online about where I'm at the dance academies or the dance congresses that I've gone to, it's all Latin dance. But I actually started learning tango when I was like 17 or 18. And this is one of the coolest, most privileged things I think about growing up in my hometown in Lawrence, Kansas, is that on Monday nights on the second floor of this coffee shop that was like, it was like a Christian bookstore. And then they had a gallery on the second floor. And on Monday nights from like 7 to 9, they would have a tango practica, which would basically be a time where people that already knew tango would come to practice for a couple of hours. And then they would have someone set up as very informal DJ who had a playlist, a big speaker. And then we would just use one half of this gallery and dance. And so I don't even remember how I found out about this, but I did. And at the time, my best friend TJ, shout out TJ, thank you for being my dance partner. I drug him to these classes, and it wasn't even classes. We would just walk up to these people after we would watch them dancing, and then we would be like, "Hey, would you mind showing us what you just did? Because we've never done this before." And they were so kind. Like, I would say the average age of these people was like 70 plus. We were the youngest people there. We would never see anyone our age. And that's how it all began.
That is so inspiring and so bold, that openness and readiness to just learn something you've never done before. How do you feel when you're dancing? Because as we're speaking, you just have this huge smile on your face, and I can tell that this is like very much at the core of who you are, to have that free spirited expression.
Such a good question. I think that depending on what kind of dance, the feeling can be different. But for the most part, it's just liberation and presence. And I think that's one of the pieces that I have found to be the greatest balance within the computer based work that I do. It's very analytical, strategic. You have to be thinking far in advance and mapping out baby steps to get to those longer term goals, whether it's my financial projections or the planning projects that I manage for my clients or the grant writing that I do. There's a part of me that can't ever really be present because of the nature of the work. And I find that the accelerated nature of how I organize my time also puts me in a place that's often like my heart is racing and I feel a little bit of anxiety because of the pressure. And then when I'm dancing, it's the complete opposite. It's like I can't have a plan because I'm following and I don't get to be in control. Someone else is. And it's so beautiful. There are some moments when you're dancing with someone else and you have the right chemistry where it's like literally everything disappears. Everything around you falls away and you're just there with the other person. And it can be so hilarious as well. Like, that's what I also love about it. I feel like I laugh more when I'm dancing than any other time in the day because it's all about making mistakes and laughing at yourself as you are making them and knowing that's part of the process of getting better. I started Latin dancing in 2020. There's all kinds of different things within that: merengue, salsa, bachata, bolero is another one. And each of them has their own flavor. And I'm by no means an expert. I'd probably say I'm past the very beginner stage. But still, it's like the more and more that you do it, the more and more you realize there's more to learn. And I feel like a beginner frequently because I keep putting myself in more advanced classes to learn the different twists and turns. And I think that a big part of why I continue to come back to dance as a just balancing factor of the other kinds of work that I do is that a lot of it comes down to your sense of competence and self-expression. And it's one of those areas where as I work to deepen my understanding of my own behavioral psychology and subconscious and healing these inner child wounds, a lot of it is fear of being seen. And so the more that I can be confident in dancing and expressing myself and being feminine and sexy, which is like something that's really uncomfortable for me right now. I just think that will translate to all of these other areas of my life, and people will feel that.
I really wish that we lived in the same city because I think we have all of the same interests. And I still can't believe that we haven't met in person yet, but it will happen. As you were talking, I was having these memories come back from college, and I would go salsa dancing in Dinkytown in Minneapolis, right outside the University of Minnesota at the Loring Pasta Bar. Maybe you know this place, but I think it closed. But it would turn into like Loring nightclub, and they would have like salsa and reggaeton music and bachata and all the things you were just talking about. And I remember when I turned 21, I started going with some of my friends, but I think I liked it more than all of them. So sometimes I would just go dancing by myself because there's so many people. It feels pretty safe and just feel like a little flower being spun in the wind because you're just following. You're being led by someone else. And I think what you're touching on is that like inner surrender, almost like inner femininity that you're allowed to express in settings like that. Where normally in other settings, because you're an accomplished person and you're very competent at your work, you're in like your masculine in a way because that is the nature and the competency you have. And so I feel like what a cool way of balancing both sides of you to kind of like dive into that liberation practice.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think it's interesting because as I've gotten deeper into this space and as I've traveled to all of these different places across the world and visited different farms, I'm taking these different ideas and I'm putting it together into the vision of what I want my own farm to look like. And having a place on site where people can take dance classes is part of the vision at this point because it's one of those things where it's like I see dance as a vehicle for healing. And in the same way that it has allowed me to just, yeah, be free and come to understand myself and to learn to trust other people, I want to be able to create spaces for that for other people. And it's just, it's so joyful. That is what I want my farm to represent is joy and healing and play, right? No matter what age you are.
I love this so much. I would love to dive a little bit into your entrepreneurial side and hear about how you got interested in agriculture and then start your own business because I feel like you have somehow struck the balance of being fully remote and being able to sustain yourself. And I think that is fascinating and very much a testament to your work ethic. So, yeah, tell me about this deep dive into agriculture.
It's interesting because I think in that moment before you take the leap of faith, and you're in a position where you're still working for someone else, you look at these entrepreneurs as in like they're on a pedestal, and then you're in it and you're like, oh, this is what it looks like, and this is what it means. I think that I have a deep admiration for other people that maybe are generating 2 or 3 times more in their business than I am. I don't think that it takes away from what I've accomplished. Like, yes, I can pay my bills. Yes, I can pay for my own health insurance. That for me was the moment where I was like, oh, okay, this is cool. But yeah, I mean, it all started at my community college. So I guess we could go back a little bit further and say that my mom truly planted the seed for the work. I think that both my sister and I do because my sister, she went off to get her bachelor's degree in culinary management, and she did a 2-year program in a culinary arts program, actually at the same community college that I was in. She also did a certificate program, but instead of sustainable agriculture like I did, she did a program in baking and pastry. And so it's been really fun actually to see the parallels in our interests develop over time in the same space, but just from different angles and approaches. And so, yeah, I mean, my mom, she's a huge foodie. I have some of the best memories of our childhood. We spent most of our weekends at the races because my dad, he's a longtime member of the Sports Car Club of America. So we would actually travel like every weekend to different events across the Midwest. And My mom, just being who she is, would print out on MapQuest the directions to get from where we were at to these restaurants. And there was these moments where it's like diners, drive-ins, and dives. What was featured as the most unique dining experiences in the city, whether it was from what they served or the environment of the actual place. And I think that really stuck with me of just truly valuing good food, going out of my way to find it. And we had an amazing garden at home. And so I got exposed to having like fresh cherry tomatoes. I would actually get in trouble a lot because I would eat them all before my mom would get home. And then she'd be like, Emily, where are all of the cherry tomatoes? And yeah, we had grapes and fruit trees and fresh herbs. Like I remember that when I was really young, I would rub my entire body in our lemon thyme because it smelled like perfume to me. And so those are like the memories that I had as like young Emily. And then once I got into community college and I was trying to grapple with this question of, okay, I'm really passionate about environmental studies, tackling these issues of climate change, but I recognize that I need to narrow my focus a bit. I basically had the option to either go on to a 4-year degree, take on a bunch of debt to do it, or stick around at this community college for an extra year, even though it would delay my graduation and basically be on scholarship and have my education paid for. So, because of my financial situation and also just knowing that this program was going to prepare me for things to come in the future, I didn't know what those were, but I just had to trust like this is going to take me down a path that I'm going to be happy with. I decided to do this program. And that was basically what exposed me to growing at scale. This was basically a 2.5-acre campus farm. And as part of the curriculum, we would have to put in 7 hours on the campus farm a week of just physical labor, of helping with harvesting, planting, whatever they needed in terms of maintenance. And I just absolutely loved it. It was the first time that I was harvesting like fresh asparagus from the ground and just eating it raw. It was also the first time that I had fresh arugula. And my mind was just open to all of these different varieties of lettuce greens. And I found that the work ethic of the farmers that we met through that program was the only thing that I had seen akin to the work ethic of the housekeepers I had been working alongside at hotels throughout high school and my early years in community college. And so it's really interesting to think about this, how stuff comes full circle, because some of my first exposure to getting to practice Spanish outside of class was working in these hotels, whether it was a breakfast attendant, I worked as a housekeeper for many years, some of the hardest work out there. But getting to know them, what they were up against in their immigration stories and safety, and still showing up to work every single day, and then seeing what farmers were doing, I could just see there was this level of authenticity that I didn't see in other places because you weren't showing up to work in some formal suit. There wasn't this face that you put on for people to perform in a certain way. You just were who you were. And that was something that I really admired. And I was like, I feel really comfortable here. And this is really my flavor of who I am. I think that I get it from my mom, but I'm known to be rather blunt. And I think that I found myself in good company in the farming community. And so that was really where it all started. And from there, it was just continuing to get more experience working on other small scale farms as I would move from one place to another, continuing to refine my understanding of what is it that people are up against if they're wanting to start a farm of their own. And then I ended up taking a planning class when I was still doing my bachelor's degree. And that was what shaped what I ended up doing for my master's degree in urban and regional planning, but focusing on food systems. Knowing that if I wasn't going to just be a farmer, but I was also going to have an off-farm income, which is basically what the research was showing, that most farmers were getting more than 50% of their income from an off-farm job. I was like, okay, realistically, I should probably be thinking about off-farm job options. And so then I was like, if I'm not just going to be a farmer, I want to not be a product of the system, but be someone who shapes it. And that was really what was instilled with me being a part of the McNair Scholars Program. It's basically this federally funded program that helps first generation ethnic minority, like low income students to eventually get a doctoral degree. And while I had no intention of actually going that far in my education, I was like, I'm going to be a farmer. I don't need this. I had this feeling, this sense of responsibility instilled in me that if I have the privilege as someone who's a very white Mexican American to operate in spaces that other people cannot access because of discrimination, I need to be in these spaces advocating for the people that don't have a voice. And that was really what drove me to do my master's degree program, not only for the influence that I could have being in that level of education and those spaces, but how is this demonstrating to other people, other young students, that, hey, if she can do it, like I might be able to do it too. And so that was really important for me. And I think that the entrepreneurial side of things fell naturally just from wanting to do big things in life and being encouraged to take risks and listening to a lot of podcast episodes while I was farming and working full time, and recognizing that there were people out there that were investing heavily in their employees to make an incredible workplace environment. And I was feeling not at all that way in the position that I had after I graduated. And so I basically was recruited by two other women, and they're like, come join us and form a consultancy with us. And I was like, okay, can you pay me? And they're like, how much do you need? So then we got started. I had the $5,000 contract, a little bit of money in an FU fund, and that was enough for me to just walk away. And I was with them for about a year and a half. It was one of the best experiences ever to get to collaborate with two other women who were a little bit older than me. They had awesome experience in the planning space. We did a lot of projects focused on community development with this really deep focus on equity and DEI. All the while, I knew, like, I want to be farming. I want to be helping farmers in this other way. And at that point, all of my experience in the space of personal growth and development and spirituality was telling me that there was a really big gap in the market. And in Minnesota in particular, I had informally studied the landscape of all the nonprofits, all the state incentive programs. What were these agencies doing to try to support farmers and accessing land? And most of the resources that were available for people focused on mental health and well-being was all about suicide prevention and like crisis hotlines. And I was like, what is this? We're really failing our farmers if this is what mental health support looks like. I want to be targeting people who don't even have access to land yet, because all of these other farmers, they're about to retire. Like, we need to be investing in the next generation of land stewards. And so that's really where my passion came from in terms of what is the mission behind what I'm building. And from personal experience too, recognizing that you can create magic in your life every single day. And most people don't realize it because we've not trained our brains to seek it out and to be able to receive it in any given moment.
Would you be able to share a little bit about how you serve the farms that are your clients? Like an example of how you're walking them through that like path to wellness in all senses, business health, but also personal health. Because I think that is really your gift, and would love to hear like the nitty-gritty of what your services are offering.
Yes. So there's different ways that I've been working with people. On the food systems consulting side, it's definitely more of the technical and pragmatic side of what I do. So a lot of that could be writing grant applications for small scale farming operations. I manage our West Central Minnesota Food Council. And so a lot of that's project management and long term goal setting and building our evaluation systems, writing grants for them as well to secure long-term funding so that these folks can implement projects in the community that are making a difference in the food policy space. Then there's the courses side of things, and that's where my heart really is in blending the practical skills around accessing financing, grant writing, with this behavioral psychology piece of, okay, here's one side of it, but what's the neuroscience behind manifestation? And why is it important to understand that as it relates to your own spiritual practice, being able to continuously come back to your own body to listen to those messages and understand what it's telling you, what directions to go in, how can you leverage that to make better business decisions, and also how can you let go and surrender, because there is a point at which, kind of what you were mentioning earlier with this like masculine feminine energy piece, it's this vivant, right? It's a give and take in any given time. And I think that as women in particular, which seems to dominate many of the people that I've served, female farmers, I mean, women in general, we're just so hard on ourselves and we set such high standards for excellence. And then balancing that with all the caregiving responsibilities. I feel like a lot of what I'm trying to bring to the farming space is more of that tenderness and the softness and the care and nourishment that has been absent for decades, because in the space, at least of larger scale conventional agriculture, it is dominated by men. And a lot of the systems and structures are built for men. That's really what I'm trying to do, is teach people these are the practical skills. Here's different habits that you can build on a daily basis. This is what it looks like to do the deeper work of like healing your inner child, so that when you are in a space of conflict, you're not responding from that 6-year-old self that didn't get what they wanted or that felt that they were unloved, but you're actually able to zoom out and see the bigger picture and understand what's actually being triggered within me right now and how can I respond in a different way so that this other person and I can come to some kind of agreement, for example. I think that the skills that we're building apply to every area of life, but in particular, I want to help farmers and help them apply it to the business space because it's just so stressful. And I think that there needs to be more room for compassion and kindness in an industry that is just so risky and unknown.
You are also the host of a podcast called The Transcendent Farmer. And we met recently to talk on that podcast. But I really want people who are specifically interested in agriculture or the food system to hop on over to your podcast, because I feel like you have this array of guests and an array of experiences that you're exposing folks to that is really interesting and useful for that whole person sense of well-being funneled into that agricultural space. What does being a transcendent farmer mean to you? I know that you ask this on your podcast, and I want to hear it in your words.
Oh my gosh, how special. Nobody's ever asked me this question before. So thank you, Molly, for the invitation. I love the word transcendence. I remember when I was first trying to come up with a name for the podcast, I was looking at all of the other sustainable agriculture podcast titles out there and trying to really understand what is my unique advantage or edge or perspective that's unlike others. And the element of spirituality was the one that I really wanted to emphasize. And that's where I felt that this word just so wonderfully encapsulated what I was trying to achieve. To be a transcendent farmer to me is to be in conversation with spirit often and to trust in that inner knowing, that wisdom, and that guidance that doesn't come from you. And to actively be leveraging that information to make decisions in your business, in your life, on your farm, right? Paying attention to those subtle differences in what the soil is telling you, what are the plants, what are the animals telling you, recognizing that we are always connected all the time.
I have goosebumps hearing you speak because I can tell that this is so soul aligned for you and you're very much on the right path. Just hearing you speak, you articulate things in such a way where I'm like, yes, you're hired. I want to hire you as my consultant. So, what is on the horizon for your business, Mezclada?
I feel like you could ask me that every single day and the answer will change. In the same way that in any given month, I'm taking a new course or I'm in a new training program. And that's just the nature of Yeah, who I am. And so right now, what does that look like? I'm really trying to prepare myself for these longer term projects within the consulting work that I do. I'm trying to launch an online digital community for farmers that takes these beta courses that I've been developing and makes them accessible to people any time of day, anywhere in the world that you have internet access, so that you can start to put these things into practice and don't feel like I need to be there in that moment to help guide you through that process. I have personally been transformed by so many online courses, so many on demand programs that I know that it works. I was in a year-long program that focused on the behavioral psychology pieces and manifestation. And it changed so much about my life and my level of emotional intelligence. That's the kind of stuff that I want to be able to offer farmers. And aside from that, I'm currently completing a professional interpreting program for Spanish through Middlebury Institute. And so continuing to prioritize the Spanish language and serving farmers in that way is another priority of mine, is just being the thread that connects people who ordinarily wouldn't be able to communicate with each other. I think that's really important. Those are just a couple of things that I'm building right now. I'd love to get the podcast just go viral at some point, like we all do as podcast hosts. But it's discipline, it's consistency, and it's continuing to iterate and fail a lot and understand the core of what people want.
And on a slightly different, really fun note, what do you love to eat that is local to your community in Mexico? I feel like, as someone who is so close to the food system and so intentionally integrated into it, what feeds you? Literally, spiritually, emotionally.
What a great question. Yes, local cuisine, the gastronomy, I would say is one of the reasons why I decided to stay here in Mexico for a while. I would say the tacos, honestly, like hands down. It is such a cool culture here that on any given block, any corner, you will find these taco stands. And I feel that the difference in what you might find as just this pop up operation in the United States versus here is the quality. The quality of the food is so good. When you see these grandmas, just it's called tortillerar, which is like basically making the tortillas by hand, and then the gorditas, right? There's all of these corn based things. And because I'm allergic to gluten, being in a corn based cuisine is special and on many levels. Even though I try to reduce the carbohydrates in general, I can't resist the tacos because you have so many different options of what you can fill them with. And then every little place has their own version of salsa. And there's just this fun culture about it where people walking by, they say like provecho, which is kind of like bon appetit, like good eats. And it's just a fun, lively environment. It gets even more fun the later in the evening you go. But it's like you can find a taco stand open at any hour of the day. And I think that's very cool. And it's delicious. So that's really feeding my soul these days.
Thank you for giving us a little peek into your daily cuisine. Other than you dancing and traveling and grant writing and consulting and doing all the things, where can listeners find you? Because I know that you have a wide variety of ways to provide your services, and you're not just limited to the continental US, but people can hire you from all over the place. So, shout out to my Hawaii farming community, all my friends in the agricultural industry here. Emily is here and she would be stoked to support you. But where can people find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if you're interested in understanding more about some of the courses that I've been offering and the podcast library, you can go to the website. So it's Mezclada, MEZCLADA.co. If you're more on the business side of things and you're interested in learning more about the consulting work that I'm doing, LinkedIn is probably going to be your best bet. You can find me, Emily Reno, there pretty easily. And then I also have a business page where I post information. It's again just Mezclada. And then then the other kind of more like international flavor of what I do, I share more about on Instagram. And then that's the same username at mezclada.co. And then, of course, if you are interested in just working with me directly and you've got maybe something that you want to pick my brain about, I offer a service called Pick My Brain Consultations. And that I would just recommend emailing me. So it's Emily at mezclada.co.
This has been such a fun conversation, and I am just really happy that we were able to find this time together to just talk story. So, Emily, mahalo again for coming on to Heartbeat.
Thank you so much, Molly. Yes, cheers to everyone that's listening and the things that you're aspiring to do. I hope that these interviews have enlightened you and given you the courage to keep chasing your dreams. And yeah, saludos de Mexico.